So, over the last 20, 30 years, Western civilization, the idea of the West as a civilization, has come under attack. I mean, even now when I say Western civilization, some of you, maybe not this group, but many groups out there, kind of start wiggling in their seats. It's a little uncomfortable. West, civilization, that sounds kind of off. But the ideas that were just mentioned, the ideas of science and reason and representative government, all ideas that represent Western civilization, or at least we believe they do. And these ideas, the ideas of a civilization, have come under dramatic attack, both from within the West, the geographic West, and from without. And I think the only way we can defend the West is if we understand what it is. One of the challenges I think we have is there's a lot of confusion about what is this thing called Western civilization. Where does it originate? Where does it come from? How is it born? Where do these ideas come from? If you think about what's going on at university campuses today, there is a real hostility to our form of life, of government. Hamas, the idea of a theocracy ruled by, mullahs, dictating life for everybody, is now somehow superior to Israel, a country where it's part of Western civilization. All of those features of the West are attributable, you can attribute imperfectly as it is, to Israel. And yes, our students at the best universities in the country prefer Hamas's rule in Gaza. A lot of the professors, not at Northwood, but at other universities, teach us that all cultures are equal. All cultures are equal. Whether it's cultures that have produced nothing or very little, and a culture that produces the amazing, amazing wealth that we have, they're the same. There's no difference between them. Indeed, multiculturalism, this idea of the equality of all cultures, is common today, prevalent all over the world. Well, I have an opinion about that. Western civilization as a culture is superior to any other culture that existed in human history. It has elevated us to great wealth. It is the only culture that supports freedom, the freedom of the individual to live his life based on his own values. It is the culture that has liberated us, for the most part, from violence. This is by far the best culture in the world that the world has ever seen. And yet we're supposed to pretend that we're just the same as any other culture, anywhere else in the world, even those that are still going at each other with bows and arrows and axes. We're not. Our culture, nothing else, not our genes, not the color of our skin, not anything else. Our culture is just better. Why? What makes it better is part of the question. And how did it get better? And this multiculturalism weakens us in facing the threats from outside. In Europe, you're seeing a real threat from Islamists in Europe, from people who would like to turn Europe into a Sharia-dominated continent. You see that in the demonstrations that are happening in London and Paris and Sweden and other parts of Europe. And how do we defend against that if we think our culture is just the same as theirs, that there's no difference between the two? It's very hard to defend. How do we defend it when we don't even know what our culture really is and what it represents? So what is Western civilization? Where does it come from? How did we get here? I think it's really important to note that there was a time when the people of the West, and let's define the West for the purposes of now, historically, Western civilization is Western Europe and the United States once it was created. There was a period in which the peoples of Western Europe were the barbarians of the earth. If you traveled the earth in, 1400, 600, 700 years ago, you would not have predicted that the West would become what it is. It was more barbaric than Islamic civilization, which was thriving at the time, much richer. And if you think about science, between 400 AD, which is the fall of Rome, and 1400 AD, in the West, there was almost no science. One example of this is human beings have always looked to the sky, and they've always tried to map out the stars and figure out how they move and figure out what's going on. They didn't get it right usually, but they were always curious about what's going on up there and what's happening. And in Greece and Rome, there were astronomers who had theories about the movement of the sun and the movement of the earth. Everything was documented. From 400 to 1400, there were no astronomical observations made. Nobody in the West theorized about what's going on in the heavens. In the Muslim world, they were doing it. Even in India, they were doing it. To some extent, in China, they were doing it. Not in Western Europe. Almost no science. Whatever writing was happening was mostly transcribing ancient books. Very little new things were being written. Economically, the West was generally depressed, certainly not as rich as the Muslim world, and not as rich as China. And then, over the course of about 500 years, the West takes off. It takes off from every perspective. Wealth, through the roof. We are, economists say we're 300 times richer today than we were 300 years ago, 400 years ago, 500. It doesn't matter because in those periods, wealth didn't change. 300 times, I think Deirdre McCluskey has done the calculation, and 300 times richer than we were back then. But that does not capture how rich we are, right? Because economists can only measure stuff in terms of dollars and cents. That's how we do things, right? You can add up balance sheets, you can add up value of assets. What's the value of running water? Toilets. What's the value of having a toilet in your home? Economists can't tell you because the toilet costs almost nothing. But what's the value to you as a human being? What's the value of electricity? It's not how much you pay for electricity. The value to you is much higher than the value of electricity. What's the value of an iPhone? Much more than the $1,000 you pay for it. So we are thousands of times richer than we were 300 years ago. So wealth exploded. Science, well, we all know the scientific revolution, the technology we have today, unimaginable. We have still, holding on barely to the rule of law, due process. We still got them. We still view them as an ideal. That didn't exist not that long ago. There was no such thing. The king, the aristocrats, they did what they wanted pretty much. And the peasants, which most of us would have been, tough. Due process? You got to be kidding me. Equality before the law? No way. Right? These are all really modern innovation. And they all were products of Western Europe. Nobody in the East, nobody elsewhere came up with the idea of economic liberty, political liberty, due process, and of course the economic system and political system of capitalism. All of this is new. It's why it's so precious. It's why it's so easy for us to give it up, because it's really, really new. Human beings have been around at least 100,000 years. What we're experiencing today, the kind of life that we have, maybe 150 years, 200 since the founding of America. That's it, 250. That's how long we've lived relatively free.